Next, I'm going to use Anastasia Beverly Hills Dip Brow in the shade Chocolate. I'm going to use my angle brush number 3. Good news, I do have my brush line coming back out closer to the end of the year, so I did add brush number 3 back into that brush set. We're going to pick up the mascara spoolie. We want to make sure that we brush up those brows first. And whenever I pick up the product, I always make sure that the product is evenly distributed on both sides of the brush so it doesn't apply chunky. And then I like to work the tail of the brow first, so the perimeter first, and then the tail. I darken the tail. Sometimes you don't always have to add a lot of brow product in the front of that brow. And then now that I have my perimeter, I'm just going to fill in sparse areas. So wherever I see a lot of skin. Remember, the end of the brow should be darker than the beginning, so you can do a little bit more filling out. At the end, we want to keep the brow looking natural, more organic, so don't fill it in too much. And then you can always take that spoolie and brush the product through. So here I'm just doing hair-like strokes at the front. Just make sure your edges are clean, especially at the top, since we're not going to go back in and add product at the top of that brow. And don't worry about it being too clean underneath the brow, because you are going to go back and apply concealer to clean it up. Okay, so now that we have the brows on, we're going to highlight underneath using this concealer. It's the same concealer that we put underneath the eyes. I like to always start off at the arch because that's the one area that stays highlighted naturally with the eyeshadow. We go into the front of the brow and we cover up some of that concealer. The one area that we need to make sure has good coverage is at that arch. What's the time? I need a time check. Now we're going to buff out that concealer. And I'm just going to add, just to even out the arches a little bit, just a little bit more to this arch on the top. Just to soften the brows a little bit, we're going to put a brow gel on top, and it's going to give it a nice subtle look on the brows. We don't want the brows to be too harsh. We're going to set the brows with MAC Brow Gel and in the shade Girl Boy. And we don't want to put too much because it is a lighter shade. I use this on my blonde heads, but I just want to lighten up her brows a little bit. And you can kind of see the difference. It's a warmer brown. Because the rules when it comes to brows, when the hair is darker, the brow should be 2 shades lighter. And then when you have like more of a blonde head, it should be 2 shades darker than the hair. So you don't want to match the hair exactly. All right, moving on to eyes. Next, we're going to be using P. Louise base in the shade 4. And I've been using the P. Louise lately, because normally my go-to is your Lay and Low from MAC. I like the texture of this, and I feel like it gives good coverage to where you don't see too much of the skin through, and you don't have to do too much blending, because I feel like it blends out nicely. Just keep in mind when you're applying this product, you don't carry it all the way up to your brow because you already have your concealer there. And just make sure you're taking the eye primer into the inner corner and meeting the outer eye contour. You don't want to deviate too far from this area because then you'll start going into foundation. All right, we have the base on. Next, I'm going to use Morphe 24G palette. Look at all these beautiful babies in there. We're going to pick up the nice transition shade. We're going to start with this one here. It's a little light, but it's going to give a nice transition. And we're going to apply this in the upper crease area. Okay, so now that we have that shade on, you see it leaves a nice tint. We're going to go in with this. Keep in mind we're doing a carved crease, so we want our placement to be precise, and we want to just do windshield wiper motions versus your circular windshield wiper motion. So we're going to go in with this shade here. We want to carry that color up to the brow. And then we're going to wing it out a little bit. So when you wing it out, it's more of a horizontal placement. I'm just using the same shade and I'm just layering. So I hope you blend the edges. You can go back in with this first shade here and just apply it to the edge. So we're going to do the other side. And you want to make sure that you're taking that brush straight on. Remember, you're gonna take this brush, pick up that first shade, and buff out the edges to blend out the edges. And you can feather, if you want to turn it towards the front, you can feather that product into the front of the brow. All right, we're going to take an even more precise shade. We're going to take a darker shade to make the carve a little bit more precise. And if you want to pick up a smaller brush to allow you to really get into that crease, you can. So let's pick up this. And this is BH Cosmetics, their Marble collection. And they don't have a number on their handle, but it's a more precise brush, as you can see. We're going to pick up this shade right here, and then we're going to start from the outer corner. And just work your way in. So notice I'm just dragging back and forth, back and forth. And you're going to angle out. So take that clean blending brush to just buff out the edges. And then that dark shade, we're going to feather it down to the lash line. So it's almost like you're creating a nice V that sits on the outer corner of that eye. You see how I'm dragging it out. I feather that product out so it creates that V, and it allows your eyeliner to go nicely into it once you're done. And as I'm working, I'm constantly going back to the edges to clean it up, to blend it out. Okay, so after we have that shade on, we're going to take it one more notch darker, and this is going to be concentrated closer to the lid. So let's go in with her right here. She's cute. Same brush. Okay, so we're going to pack it to that outer corner. Pack, pack, pack. Pack, pack, pack. Drag it again down to the lash line. And then in the crease, you're going to round out that crease with this shade. And then wing out a little bit. Okay, so we do have a lot of intensity in that crease, and because we're trying to look for a more carved out look, I'm going to pick up that P. Louise product again just to place it on the lid. So it's not a cut crease, but we just want to show more dimension with that P. Louise in there. So I'm just going to apply it a little higher. So we want to bring it a little higher just to show that carved look. Again, not a cut crease look, but a carved look, so it's not going to be precise. And then this is the last shade, so the darker shade, I'm just going back in. All right, so now we're going to smoke out the bottom of the eyes because I like a good balance. And you always start off with the darkest shade that you use on the top. It's a good match. And whenever we're smoking out, you want to start off with that darkest shade. If you want to take it a step darker, you can just go back in with that shade that you used on the top. So we can take it a little darker, which I'll do today, and then I'm going to go back to this shade. And this is Color du Jour brush number 5. Okay, I applied that shade. I'm going to go back in with this shade to work it on the edges. And then I'm going to pick up a more precise head to pick up a transition shade to work along that. And it just keeps this from looking so hard at the bottom. It's a nice transition into the skin. Now on the top, we're just going to go in with a matte eyeshadow. So we're going to use that shade that we started off with. And I always like to apply matte with a fluffy head. So this is Morphe 433. And we're just going to pack it onto the lid. All right. For a good transition of this application, we are going to go back in with her right here, just so it's not so hard sitting up against that lighter eyeshadow. We want to place a nice transition in between those two. So let's pick up this. Let's mix them, actually, these two. And then I'm going to pack it. You don't want to do too much moving here, because we don't want to take away the intensity of that matte eyeshadow. Creates a nice transition. Okay, now that we are done with most of the lid, just to create more of a carved look, we're going to take this darker shade here And I'm using the lid brush, and I'm just going to precisely place it in the crease. And then you can feather the rest of that product into the front of that brow. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit of smudging to the top lash line before we go in with eyeliner. So I'm going to pick up this pencil brush here. We're going to pick up this darker shade. And I'm just going to drag it along, still creating more of like a V shape on that outer corner. I'm going to drag it along the lash line.